My name's Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Special guest today, man. The great Kevin Eastman, one of the architects of our childhood.
It's hard to go too far beyond Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, of course, but huge fan of Tundra, owner publisher of heavy metal for almost 20 years. One of the guys that really put creator rights on the map for me.
And one of the storied collaborations with the great Simon Bisley.
Yes.
We could go on and on, man, but time is limited. So let's get into things. Kevin, thanks for coming by.
Pleasure being here with you guys. This is great. Thank you. Thanks for asking me on.
You create the Turtles. Great success, wild success beyond anybody's imagination, has never been replicated. You go on Tundra, all of that stuff. You sell the rights to Peter. Peter sells the rights to the Turtles to Viacom. And right now you're doing work for hire stuff on Turtles for IDW. That's a heck of a plot twist, man.
It is. It's you can't make this stuff up. It's a no. You figure that the Turtles really were created out of love and passion for all things comics by Peter and myself. We enjoyed about a 20-year career of doing and managing and controlling all things Turtles. And as you said, at some point I wanted to kind of move on and do some other things. Both Peter and I idolized Jack Kirby, and so my biggest fascination with Jack Kirby is that he created so many wonderful characters in so many different universes through multiple companies for all the work he did with Marvel, of course, with Stan Lee, then what he did with DC. And so I just wanted to do some other things, but the Turtles were never far from wherever I was. I sold to Pete. Pete sold to Viacom and retired. And then Viacom called me in probably 2010, 2011, and they were beginning a development on a new animated series, which I get to work with the awesome Cyril Neely on that 2012 series when it launched from 2012 to 2017. But the thing that really was exciting to me was when IDW called, because they obtained the license for Turtles in 2011. And so they brought me in and asked me to sort of look over what this incredible writer, a guy named Tom Waltz, wanted to do with the series. And not only I just, really thought a lot of Tom as a creator and the ideas that he had, but what IDW wanted to do with the series, really do something that was intended for that original black and white audience. And so since 2011, I've worked with Tom Waltz and Bobby Curnow and IDW and an amazing array of artists. We completed 100 issues in December. What? And it was the best time I had with Turtles in a long time. It was probably the closest that you'd ever see to that original. I can't compare it to what Peter and I did originally, but it was the closest thing. And I think it'll probably be looked back on, and at least in my opinion, is one of the definitive runs in turtle history. It's fantastic. I just finished the cover for issue 107 yesterday, so I'm still digging it. Me and Tom are doing Last Ronin and other stuff. I'm sure we'll get into. So.
That's awesome. Whenever we think about indie comics, of course, the Turtles is, sort of this landmark high point of what can be achieved with creator ownership. And, we see it from the outside as this idealized success story. But we've read about you a lot. We've talked to other people that were, around Mirage. And I wonder about maybe the dark side of success and the scale of that success. I don't hear that talked about much, but, what was that experience like as Turtles take off, but it also pulls you maybe away from the comics part, the part that we all, love to do, the drawing and making of. Can you talk about maybe the dark side of that success a little bit?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And as a guy that got into the business because I loved and wanted to draw comic books, as did Peter, the mission is writing and drawing comic books. So the dark side, and it's not really a dark side, and I'll explain a bit more in a second, but the dark side is that the success of the Turtles pulled us off the drawing board from doing what we were doing every day, which is writing and drawing comic books. But the plus side of all that was we knew how incredibly lucky we were. Our spirit of independence was firmly born in guys like Dave Sim, who created Cerebus, and Wendy and Richard Pini, who did ElfQuest, and so many underground publishers in the late 60s and early 70s that were self-publishing their own works. That was what really inspired us, as well as, the giants we stood on the shoulders of, guys like Jack Kirby, which I mentioned. He created so many characters that he never had full control over. That was the nature of the business. It was work for hire, and he knew it when he did it. And we knew we were very lucky that we created our comics independently. So whatever was going to be done or not done with the Turtles was totally up to us. And so that was the plus side. Again, the dark side is that once you create something, and because the fan response and what made it a big success was then you had to manage your property, and you had to manage your business. Again, not a complaint, because we were in control, but it was it took away from the creativity. We still worked on the animated shows, and we worked on the toy development and so many other creative aspects to the property. But it was hard that you weren't doing it the way you idealized, when you were 9 years old, sitting in a room writing and drawing. But again, no complaints. It was probably the dark side might be the personal toll of some of it. That Peter and I were friends. We were creative co-creators. We were partners creatively, and then suddenly every day was, for 15 years, it was just a lot of work. And so once you lose that bond, because you have to put out fires with lawsuits and complaints, and just epic sort of the business aspect was pretty intense. Just sort of the personal tolls, we never got to have that much fun anymore, and so that was the tough part, I guess.
Something we were talking about earlier about just like how do we discover the original Turtles comics? Both of us, man, it was the first comics, graphic novels. Those were able to somehow penetrate Walden Books at the local mall. Question to you, and it would have to be from an outside perspective, but how the heck does First Comics go out of business when they were licensing those things and they were selling like hotcakes?
That's a good question, because it was First Comics was as a alternative publisher, was a real innovator and generally a creator friendly company. When you think like what they were doing with projects like Steve Barron and Mike Barron and Steve Rude's Nexus, or American Flag with Howard Chaykin, and just the Elemental. There was so many fantastic things that First Comics was doing, but to us the relationship was based on the Turtles. Like you said, it was the first time we were able to see our characters from black and white into full color, and they had bookstore distribution. So and I've signed so many of those comics over the years, and those are some of my favorite versions. But it was one of those that I was always curious of what brought down First Comics. I'd be very curious, because it was a really strong, powerful company that had a lot of support out there in the industry. So I was curious, but yeah, that was still the creator, the full color Turtles comics was still the bomb.
Kevin, this is a very nerdy channel.
Yes.
And were you about to ask that question?
I am. Yeah, I think I'm going to get into some of the real minutia here. Those comics look like the line work is reproduced from something other than the line work in the artist edition of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1. I have always been curious about where does the line work come from in those first color editions?
Great question, because it is, when Peter and I were first doing the original black and white comic books, we used this. It's sort of a craft art paper called Duo Shade, and you would treat it like you would any normal, comic book pages, whereas you pencil on it, then you ink on it, and then there's lines printed within the paper, and you use these two different chemicals that bring out that cross-hatching effect that you used to seeing in the black and white comic books. And so when we first did it, we were nervous if it was going to work effectively, or it would give the look that we wanted. So just to be safe, we photocopied the black and white original line work before we actually did the craft tint, the shading on it. And that was just sort of practice for our own archives, because Peter and I are bordering on hoarding archivists, that we save everything. And so we photocopied every single page of every single issue in the original line work before we did the craft tint. And then the craft tint was the duo shade was the look that you saw printed in the black and white comic books that gave it that 2 extra shades of gray. So that was from original line work. And so when it came time to color it, it's funny because these days everything's done on computer color, but back in those days they did this process called blue line, which was they would print on acetate that line work, and then put it on a piece of watercolor board and then expose it to light with this chemical. And so when you looked up the clear plastic overlay, there was this whole blue line printing of every image that was on the acetate. And so the colorists, like Steve Levine, who colored a lot of those early issues, would literally have to color a section of it and then sort of keep laying it down to make sure it all looked right and that they stayed within the lines. It's like, the worst version of trying to stay in the lines as a kid with your coloring book. It was an intense process, but it was really fun. So that's where it came from. Yeah.
Thank you for being a hoarder. I've appreciated some of the books that have come out in the last couple decades that show some of that process stuff and some of that original art. So I'm glad that you guys have that mentality.
And we answered a big question, man. Kevin, we on this channel more than once have compared and contrasted, showing very close to the camera the line art from issue 1 and like, how did they do it? That's the kind of channel that you're dealing with right now, and we cover all kinds of stuff. One of the things we talked about was the Comics Journal interview, legendary Comics Journal interview that you did with my great publisher Gary Groth over there at Fantagraphics, and some of the stuff that came up in that discussion back then had to do with the Words and Pictures Museum and all that, and just like the amazing art collection that you procured at the time, and big numbers, you got those pages, all that stuff. I imagine some of the stuff from the IDW artist editions, and I'm just like looking at all of my artist editions up there. Some of that stuff must have come from your collection, like the Elektra Lives Again and some of that material, or Elektra Assassin. My bad. Yeah.
Oh no, and that was to me, it was like I just remember my family was very artistic. My grandmother painted and watercolor. My dad used to doodle a lot and stuff, so that we were exposed to, you went to museums, not very often, but enough when we were kids. But to me, it was fascinating where when you see a picture of a painting in a book like that, say an N.C. Wyeth or just whatever, that was a big inspiration of mine. The picture in the book did it no justice when you actually go into a gallery and you see the painting and right in front of you. You can get like within a few inches of it usually and see the brush strokes and see how they did it. That was so fascinating to me. So that when, my passion for, artwork and resonated in comic book artwork, the more I saw and the more people that I got to meet, I just loved buying original art because it was just something you could see every mistake, you could see every whiteout, you could ever see every imperfection or happy accident and things. So that was what was just so fascinating to me, and that's what I really wanted to build and attempted to do with the Words and Pictures Museum. But and that's what's so great. I also was like, if you look over there, is all my IDW artist editions. Because my friend Scott Dunbier and IDW as a company really started that idea of scanning the originals in a way that you could see that same impression that you see in the artwork, every blemish, mistake, a coffee stain or whatever. But yeah, I think it was a bunch of my collection or my ex collection that made some of those artist editions complete, which I adore. So I still get to enjoy them. But
yeah, it feels a lot like that Words and Pictures Museum was a bit ahead of its time. Maybe before people really, it seems in the last 15 or 20 years, the public has come around and started to appreciate comics as art. And it feels like that Words and Pictures Museum would have been just in the right, before that movement really took hold. But still exciting as a historical, place to visit and think about. So it's fun to see that pop up in interviews or in backstories about you.
Well, I appreciate that, but I do think it is like, it may have been ahead of its time, but I do think, when you look at history of comic books, there's certainly that medium and the art form of that is that every step of, I remember hearing stories that Frank Frazetta used to take less money for the work that he did because in those days they used to keep the originals. He said, I'll take less money for this painting, but I want my painting back. he's one of those guys that really innovated the return of artwork, which then took a number of other years before everybody started getting artwork back. So every step, from Mort Walker's museum, which was first in Rye, New York, and then Boca Raton, to MoCA, they did one in New York City. So it's all a piece in time. And I look now that when you see auction sites like heritage auctions, where you see original art going for, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for some of those. Used to be able to buy like a Spider-Man, a John Romita Spider-Man page for $150, which was insanely cheap. And you were like, oh my God. And now it's selling for, $30,000. So I think that the respect and the appreciation for this true American art form is growing as our appreciation grows and we get older. So it's all an evolution. So one day, if I win the lottery, I will I'll open Words and Pictures Part 2.
One of my favorite artists is Simon Bisley. You've done a lot of collaboration with Simon Bisley. I'm curious, how does he get on your radar initially?
Same. It's very. It's funny. It's a great question because it really dovetails in from the original art side of it. Is that I was a huge fan of Simon's artwork because he was sort of the next evolution of, say, a Frank Frazetta, where he really embodied everything we loved about Frazetta, but he also had a bit of Corbin and, of course, a lot of his original Simon Bisley-isms. And so I started collecting some of his original art. And
Kevin, real quick, can I ask a question? Because another thing that we pose on this channel, we just have no idea about, like a Simon Bisley cover painting, we'll say, what's the scale of that? Is it 2 times bigger? Is it on 11 by 17? Is it much bigger?
I'm laughing because I have a Simon Bisley original over here that he did for me years ago, which is probably like an 18 by 22. But I've gotten Simon Bisley originals on a back of a pad of paper. I've gotten them from, it's like when you buy a large sketch paper, the inside cover looks like he ran out of paper, but he had to do this painting and send it to me for a project we were working on. So he'd sort of rip off the cover and then do the painting on that piece of paper. So I've gotten Simon Bisley originals in every way, shape, and form. And it's a matter of what's next to him and what he wants to do with it, which to me was, when I first met him and we sort of started working together on a couple of projects, was the sign of what I thought is a true and original artist, is that it didn't matter what he was painting on or what he was painting with. Everything was a tool. It could have been a broken stick or a nice paintbrush, but it was never nice that long. I have pictures of him working on a piece he did for me where he's got the painting's this big, but he's got a plate of curry. So it's like, vindaloo and beans and rice and a beer and something all sitting on it, and he's smoking and he's talking about this stuff while he's painting on it, and it doesn't matter. He was just such a incredibly natural artist to me that it was just he almost did his work without thinking, which I thought was a sign of a true genius. So.
I veered you off in the conversation. We were asking about how you hooked up with him for future collaborations, and the original art was a part of that.
Oh yeah, no, but it works together because it was, I was starting to work with with Tundra Publishing. I was working with a lot of artists based in the UK. And so I started what started to be just a small office in London so that we can interact with, Alan Moore's and Simon Bisley's and so many others that Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. And so I went over and I was buying some other art from Simon, and I was showing him some of the other stuff I was working on. And I just asked him, I said, well, what's your next big project? And he said, well, I'd like to work with you on something. And so I was, taken aback and quite flattered. And so we developed a couple things that we started working together and then worked together for a number of years on. So, and we still keep in touch to this day. I see him at, my wife Courtney and I, we see him at conventions and we see him around. And one day again, we'll work on something together.
Another person from UK that I'm a fan of that I think you may have worked with a little bit is Jamie Hewlett. I believe he had a Tundra
I was talking with some of my British brethren while hanging out in Tokyo, and they mentioned something, the man with 1,000 brains, something like that.
Yeah, there was, Jamie had a number of ideas because, I love Tank Girl, huge Tank Girl fan, and what he was doing in is just he was one of those guys that was like, I just like the British mentality of a lot of these guys in that it was sort of they could look to the kinds of comic books that were being done in Europe, which were much more appreciated, much more diverse, and you can go from very esoteric to very historical to very avant-garde to everything in between. Very little superhero material in the European side, and then they would look to America, and you would see the things that like Alan Moore and a lot of British creators are doing after leaving 2000 AD, which we love Judge Dredd and ABC Warriors and all those things. And so they were sort of right in the middle of these two worlds. And so they could really appreciate and elaborate on both. So we explored a number of ideas with Jamie. I don't think we ended up actually completing a project with him because Tundra was so short-lived. But still to this day, I mean, I think shortly after he started working with Gorillas, and then that's a whole other legendary tale of awesomeness.
Some of our favorite stuff to do on the channel is to go out to comic shops, go dig in the quarter bins. Very often, the comics that we find in the quarter bins come from the Black and White Explosion, 1986, and we found gems personally. Like we dusted off some really cool stuff that really hasn't been talked about very much elsewhere. I wonder from those Black and White Boom comics when you were out there in the trenches doing cons and stuff, any standout Black and White Boom comics that don't get enough attention that we should have our eyes peeled for?
Well, it's funny is like that some of them evolved into more mainstream like projects. Some retained that underground aspect and sort of drifted away when either the creator drifted away into some real life job or didn't. Because comics it's a hard scrabble way to make a living. But for me it was like like. Certainly with the success of the Turtles, there was a number of parodies of our parody of comics. My favorite being the adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters, which I thought was fantastic. And there's a number of those things. But, projects like, I guess, Flaming Carrot, which came before us and then a lot more after us. Projects like... Mr. Monster, which came out as evolved out of that black and white series. Of course, ElfQuest. William Messer Loebs was a great innovator and creator and writer that went on to many other things. And even you think because we were starting around the time that remember Kamiko? When Kamiko started, and you had Matt Wagner, and you had Bill Willingham with the Elementals, and Grendel, and so many of those projects that started as black and whites that went on. So I think it was really an important time in the history of comic books when the Turtles emerged, again, building off, Dave Sims started self-publishing service in 1976. Robert Crumb, the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, countless others, Rip Off Press, Last Gasp, Kitchen Sink. Those guys have been publishing underground comic books in the late 60s, early 70s. Dave Sims sort of inspired us as we went into the early years of the 80s with the emergence of the Turtles. And then everything that sort of came in that black and white boom and bust was bridging of the underground comic books meets the mainstream comic books, and sort of, we call it ground level comics. So it was sort of like, these weren't like, adults only comic books, and these weren't for kids only Comics Code approved comic books. These were something right in the middle. So it was an important step into this explosion of, what was to come next, the evolution of what was to come next. So, and I still know, people that were doing comic books back then are still doing them now. And we see each other at conventions and laugh about how old and fat we've gotten. So, and we're still working, and we're still writing comic books, which is the best thing ever.
Yeah, it's the ultimate endorsement. Kevin, you have kind of a huge, wide career. We're not going to be able to get into all of that today. I wonder, when you look back on it, when you reflect on your successes, what are some of the highlights and points of pride for you?
That's it really was. I always point to the ultimate success to me, and I'll say this for both Peter and I. In 1985, we solicited for the second issue of the Turtles. We sold 3,000 copies of the first issue in its first printing. We did a second printing in 1984 for 6,000 copies. But we were still both working a variety of other jobs. I worked in restaurants. I actually worked at a night shift at a hotel, which was great because I did the third shift so I could draw at night in between checking in drunks or whatever. But in 1985, we got our orders in from the distributors for issue 2, and it was 15,000 copies. And Peter did some quick calculations and said, we were both blown away. He said, this is amazing. If we were able to do like 6 of these a year, we're making about $2,000 each as a profit on these kind of numbers, then we could stop and quit all those other jobs and just start comic books for a living, which we did. And then so around January of 1985, I started drawing comic books full time, as did Peter, which to us was that ultimate fantasy of the childhood dream coming true. And so we get to be, in our minds, we were Jack Kirby, even if it lasted 6 months or lasted a year or lasted 2 years, we were getting up every day and paying our rent and drawing comic books for a living. So that was really, once you sort of hit that highlight, that was the best. There was nothing greater than that. But then we were so incredibly blessed with the continued good sales and large sales. And then, when the contacted and it became a cartoon series, and a toy line. I remember this is a great measure of success that sort of grounds you properly. Is my grandmother used to send me $20 regularly in a birthday card. When she saw that the Turtles were a question on Jeopardy, she knew I was successful, so she no longer had to send me $20 and a birthday card. So that's a measure of success, right? And furtherance to that, because I talk a lot, the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you guys 36 years after the first issue of the Turtles came out. And as I pointed out, I was working on a turtle cover before I jumped on the phone with you. And when I get off the phone with you, I'll get off the line with you. I'm going to go back to drawing comic books. And I've been doing it for now 36 years. And that's the greatest.
One of the greatest kind of time capsule pieces to kind of explain to people the trajectory of the Turtles' success really is the editorial pages on the inside covers of those fucking comics, man, where you see the perhaps even like youthful naivete for a little while. And then I think it's in Raphael 1, the editorial in there, where it's like, hey guys, it looks like we had to keep our mouths quiet for a little while, man, but it looks like this cartoon is definitely going to happen. But you got to let your like local channel know that it's going to happen so that you could carry it. And then things just went on from there. I think the one piece of merchandise that people could buy were those like little pewter figures. But just as a reading experience, those editorials, I don't know if you've done it yet, or what. Perhaps you could point us in a direction, but those need to be collected in a linear fashion, because that really sells the American dream aspect of like what you guys were going through.
That's a great idea, and honestly, it hadn't occurred to me now, because it is funny when we do look at those, because we have some of those issues, and I'll pull something out and I'll just scan it, whether it be actually Stan Sakai was visiting us over the weekend. We some of our first still social distancing getting together, and he had seen a reprint of one of the early issues of the Turtles that he had a pinup in. He's like, oh my God, that was 1,000 years ago. And we were laughing about it. But it is right that those things that we put in those were very timely, right up to the moment of what was going on at that exact time during those early years, which is That's good. I think that if nothing else, I'll definitely talk to our crew, and we'll put some of those online, because that's a really brilliant idea.
I would kill for that, man. Some of those editorials a little expensive. It would take 5 months rent to get that that first editorial. Ask a quick one, Jimmy.
I have to mention creator rights, Kevin, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, Turtles are one of the first books and first creators that really brought that notion to me, and probably to a lot of people my age. You have mentioned underground comics. I wonder if you can talk about creator rights and how conscious you and Peter were of that and of spreading that around. It seems like a lot of creators joined you there in the mid to late 80s. Can you talk about creator rights, not just on your career, but also on like putting that out into comics at large?
No, it was something that, as I mentioned, I touched on earlier, was this idea that when we started being approached to do, whether it be a role-playing game or a cartoon show or a toy line, we were in full control of all things Turtles. And we were very aware at that time, because there was a lot of discussion from creators that were working within the Marvel system or the DC system, which was still work for hire, and they were still fighting to get their artwork back. They were fighting for ownership and say and control of the characters, as well as they were also these folks, like Frank Miller and Alan Moore and so many other people who were fighting for the legends that we stood on the shoulders of, which didn't have, and because of the system, and it was the way the system was back then, it's no excuse for it, but it was the way that it was a work for hire system, that they wanted to see these legends who were still drawing comic books to make a living, to pay their mortgage or pay their rent, to get a piece of the profits from the success of their creations. And so there was a long time, Marvel kept all of Jack Kirby's artwork. DC, I think at that time, had given Jack Kirby's artwork back to him. And so there was it wasn't just us in any sense, that there was a whole movement within the community of comics aren't just for kids, that there is creative ownership. There's, you see skyscrapers in Manhattan that house the publishers like Marvel and DC, and they're making a lot of money for their shareholders, but they're not paying their creators. There were a lot more independent publishers, like we mentioned, First Comics. There was Capital Comics, Pacific Comics. There was a lot of other self-publishers that had begun to emerge and enjoying the success of creator rights. So we got together, and it was just around the time of mutual appreciation of guys like Dave Sim and Steve Bissett and Rick Veitch, and we just said, look, if you're going into the world of comic books, it's a hard scrabble, and there's more people that don't make it than make it. We just want you to know your rights, and so we put together the Creators Bill of Rights, which just said, just be aware of them. If you take an opportunity with a creation of yours, and you go with a large company and you give up all those rights, at least you know what you're giving up. If you decide not to give up those rights, or keep some of them and give up some of them to make it all work, we just want you to know what we think your rights were. And it was just a more informational, like an artist guild, just to say, be careful, be aware, and don't let somebody steal your idea and profit from it and not pay you. So it was something that we thought was important to at least let people know. So,
we're gonna call this a mini shoot interview because I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff we did. There was a 4-hour conversation with Steve Bissett, getting very, very deep, man. So we got to let you go right away. But one final question, and let's do it again sometime. Like if you have more time available, we'd love to get into some stuff, man, because we barely even brought up the name Richard Corbin, and I need to go down that road with you as soon as possible. Final question, man. Where is that M1 tank that you got with your first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles royalties? Did that come to San Diego with you, or what?
No, it was actually for all those years I lived in when I lived in LA, I would certainly have loved to use that to getting through traffic from the studio city over the Hollywood side.
Was it in any way operational? Like, could that thing move, or you had to trailer it places?
Yeah, and it's like it's you bring up an interesting point, and I'll say this without being too long-winded, which is hard for me to do. Is there's a really great documentary called Turtle Power. If you ever want to see a full, truthful, on-point, cleverly done, well-researched documentary on all things turtles, Turtle Power is something you should look up. There was an episode of a show called The Toys That Made Us, which was humorous at best in so many aspects, right to the point of like saying opening statement on The Toys That Made Us. They said I was born in Springvale, Maine. I don't know where Springvale, Maine is.
We were just talking about like not believing any articles we read, nor TV shows or documentaries.
So it was funny that the way that Toys That Made Us sound like that. Peter and I got a check, and then I ran out and bought an army tank. Which is,
You're crushing my dreams here, Kevin.
Probably should have, but the point is that a bunch of years later, I actually met. I was doing some work in Hollywood, and I met a producer and a director, and they were working on a movie that. And I met this guy that was supplying military vehicles to different movie sets. And I was joking with the guy, and I said, "Hey, when I was a kid, I loved this comic called The Haunted Tank. It was in a DC comic series called GI Combat." And I said, it was an M1 5/8 Stuart light tank. And he said, I go, "Hey, you got a Stuart light tank for sale?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "What? Really?" And I said, "Yeah, well, how much?" And he goes, "Well, $30,000. And I was like, $30,000 for an army tank? Are you serious? And he goes, "Yeah, this one in particular was used in a movie called Red Dawn and a couple other movies. And it was fully operational. It was twin Cadillac engines. It drove like a bulldozer. You just kind of like would break a tread to turn it and stuff." And so I said, $35,000 for an operational army tank. And he said, "Yep." And I go, "I'll take it." So, this was probably 91 or 92 that I bought it. So it was many, many years later, but I had it for a long time. And I actually I lived in up in the woods in Massachusetts, and I used to drive around the woods. It was great.
It's amazing.
And then years later, I sold it to a museum. But but the thing that always bums me out is they don't mention that in I think it's probably 92 or 93, I bought the Batmobile from the first Michael Keaton Batman movie, which was even more awesome than the tank. I love the tank, but the Batmobile was pretty righteous as well.
Was that thing operational?
It was, yeah. It was built on a 1973 Chevy Impala frame. It was 22 feet long, fully operational. It was full decked out for full shooting. It was the one that you saw driving. I think they had like 5 different versions, close-up versions and stuff. So it had all the equipment, all the fake equipment, the slider on top, and you could drive it around town.
That's fucking dope, man. Kevin, we could do this all day. We want to do this all day. Let's agree to do it again sometime. But we got to let you get going back to drawing that Turtles cover.
Yes, no, actually, I'm jumping back to I'm working on a new series called a turtle series called The Last Ronin, which is based on a story that Peter and I wrote in 1987. Tom Waltz, the head writer of the last 100 issues of the Turtle comics, we're adapting it into a 5-part series. It'll be about 200 pages when it's done. So I'm going back to work on that this afternoon. And all things turtles. And I'd love to come back and talk to you guys some more. Certainly, awesome. I have to listen to your Steve Bissett interview.
It'll keep you company while drawing, man. And shouts to Andy Kuhn, who's drawn that Last Ronin book, at least a couple of issues of that. Kevin, do you have any plugs to drop before we get out of here? Where can people find you? www.kevineastmanstudios.com. It's our home website. We have a fan club there. We have just tons and tons and tons of free content you can look and see, and stuff for sale and original art and stuff. But if you want to find out what I'm doing, where I'm doing, and different events that we've been doing, a lot of
watch TMNT with me. We watched the first and second movie. We're going to watch the third one soon. So it's a great place to hang out if you want to find out what I'm up to, or the latest and the greatest, or behind the scenes. Then tune in there, and you find me there. KevinEastmanStudios.com.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you again for your example in terms of creator rights. I'm sure I speak for a couple generations that turtles have been a big inspiration to a lot of us. So thank you for that.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate that very much. And it was great talking with you today. And let's talk again.